point, we are back. What's going on, everybody? For those of you that are new here, or for those of you who forgot who I am because it's been so long since we've done one of these videos, my name is Matt Stigler. I'm a pro footballer performance coach, and today I'm going to take you through a hip mobility routine where I'm going to show you the secret to what I use with my pro and youth athletes to get mobility changes to actually stick and actually stay with you. And it's going to be a way more beneficial mobility routine where it also kind of incorporates some strength. You'll see what I mean when we actually do the routine. And we're going to get into some spinal mobility, some ab work. So this is going to be really beneficial for those of you that want to do literally anything athletic on the pitch. We also got a lot of really good questions on the last video. So for those of you that are new, again, if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the comments of this video, and then the next time I record one of these workouts, which is just about weekly at this point, sometimes even twice a week, I'll get back to you and I'll respond to your question in the following video. So enough talking, let's get right into it. Basically, really quickly, the breakdown of what the mobility stuff is going to be. We're going to work on hip mobility in all different directions of the hip. So we're going to work flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and then we're going to work it in a rotational sense as well, internal rotation and external rotation. But we're going to use proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF. And the really simple way of understanding that is if I want my hip to go one way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a strong contraction in the opposite direction to get those muscles on the opposite side to relax. And then we're going to move the joint through that opposite range of motion. So we're working on strengthening you in end ranges of motion so that the hip can move in all directions. It's going to be a lot easier for you to understand when we actually get into it. So let's get into the first exercise. Also, while we're here, I've had so many of you guys comment on my voice not being loud enough. I did get some new mics, praying that these aren't going to do me dirty this time, and hopefully they actually record every single time that I do as well. Okay, so let's get into it. So when it comes to hip mobility, number one most important thing is getting the keys out of your pockets. Number two most important thing is going to be, I always like to start with flexion because it is an external rotation based hip mobility exercise. And not to get too much into the dorkiness of it, but flexion is paired with external rotation and abduction, and external rotation hip exercises are what we need to do first, and then we can get into the internal rotation based off of that. When you do external rotation hip mobility exercises first, then they actually help you benefit from the internal rotation based ones, and the internal rotation based ones are going to be extension, adduction, and internal rotation. Okay, so a lot of you have done end range hip flexion exercises before, where maybe you would just take this and you just raise the foot up and hold that position, or maybe you've done like hurdle based exercises where you're bringing that leg up and around and over something. This is very similar, but to make it PNF based, to make it stick a little bit more, what we're going to do is we're actually going to drive that foot into extension first and then get it into flexion, okay? So I'm not going to be able to talk as I do this because PNF really requires like an active max contraction, okay? So what I'm doing here is I have my foot on a box, I'm pointing the toe towards me. Now I'm going to drive that heel down into the box as hard as I can without letting my hips shoot forward here. I'm staying nice and tall. I'm getting a huge contraction in the hamstring here, even a little bit in the glute and hip. I'm gonna hold this for 30 seconds. Now, because I just drove my heel down into that box for 30 seconds, this front part of my leg has no choice but to relax because we're getting a max neuromuscular contraction on the bottom. Now, because of that, I can unlock new ranges of motion as I do liftoffs here. So I'm gonna go 5 seconds up, 5 seconds off, 4, 5 reps. So it's here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and down, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up, 2, 3, 4, 5, and down. With this exercise, I could get a ton more range of motion if I just shifted my hips back and really allowed myself to lean, but that's not the goal. Looking for a relatively straight line from shoulder to hip to knee to foot here. So as you do the first set, your hip should be burning. The hip of the side where the foot's on the ground should be burning from stabilizing you and making sure to not let that hip drift forward. And this hip obviously should be burning from lifting that leg up off the ground. I like to do at least 2 sets each side with a 30-second contraction on one side, and then the 5x5x5 lift-offs. Should be shaking a bit as you're doing this if you have some actual intensity behind it. Whew. Let's get this first question rolling here though. Let's see. All right, so first question right here. My problem at the moment is that I have really bad pain in my groin area, and it has been like this for months now, but I just keep training because I can't, because I hate to be out of training and our season just started. My mind goes wild if I can't train, as I get these thoughts that other people are working and that he is getting left behind. He really needs to recover from the injury because it's affecting the performance and can't even train properly. So it sounds like this is a pretty significant injury. Any advice or tips on how to calm my mind and make the decision of staying off the pitch for a while and getting this sorted? Also, anything on recovery from the groin area / hernia would be much appreciated. Thank you. Well, first of all, I fully understand this mentality of feeling like you're being left behind. I think there's 2 ways you can go about this. You can try and logic your way out of it, but I feel like you've probably already tried that. What I mean when I say logic your way out of it is like, okay, you feel like you're being left behind, but there's really no way that you can actually be left behind anymore than if you keep hurting yourself and you keep pushing your progress backwards, because there's no way that you're going to make it to whatever level you really want to do if you have this serious injury that you can't get rid of, right? So logically, you should know, okay, the thing that I need to do is rest, stay off the pitch, do my rehab work, and actually really diligently rehab this. Now, maybe that's hard for you for a few reasons. Maybe you don't feel like deep down that your recovery is actually getting better if you just rest, and I would 100% agree with that. And hopefully we can give you some exercises that can actually speed up this recovery process and get you stronger. At the same time, maybe this is something that we need to tackle from an emotional perspective. Because you feel like you are getting worse on the pitch, we can actually do multiple things to kind of calm your mind and get you feeling a little bit better about what's happening here. And the first and most obvious one is to still do some type of training. I can guarantee you that no matter how serious this injury is, you can still do some type of exercises that can progress you and get you moving towards your goal of getting back onto the pitch. I bet there's even a way that you could do some dribbling, or you could get some touches even in like a seated position if you can't like weight bear on that leg, just so your body still remembers how to like navigate a ball. The other thing from an emotional perspective I would say is try and do some things that aren't necessarily football and training related to get your mind off of it a little bit. I don't know if you have other things outside of football and the pitch that you really enjoy, but if not, maybe it's time you explore some of these things. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You could pick up just like writing, or you could pick up like a new book. All of these things will be really beneficial to kind of relaxing your mind and getting it off of football a little bit for the time being. But in terms of recovering from an adductor injury, I actually have the next exercise. This is a complete coincidence, but the next exercise is going to help you with adductor recovery. Well, I guess it's not the next exercise, but it'll be in this routine. So you'll see it and you'll know which one it is. Anyway, I hope you get better soon, man. On to the next exercise here. Whew. All right, guys. So, almost lost my balance there. So the last exercise, we worked on hip flexion by driving hip extension. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to drive hip flexion so that we can get more hip extension. So we had the external rotation based hip exercise in the sagittal plane, which is just forward and backward. So my hip was moving forward. Now we're moving it backward, behind us, forward, backward. And now that we've done the external rotation based one, we're gonna do the internal rotation based one. And just like with anything that we do in terms of our strength training, our mobility training, we want to do it in different positions. So the last one we did standing, this one we are going to do quadruped. Here's what it's going to look like. So quadruped just means we're either going to be down on knees and hands or knees and elbows. For this one, we're going to go knees and elbows. And I've learned my lesson from doing these types of exercises with this clipped on to my shirt. That's not going to happen. So we're going to set you down right here. So what I'm going to do is in quadruped, I'm gonna put one foot down on this bench, and I'm gonna make sure that this back foot is elevated as high as I need it to be, or as high as it can be, without me dumping into a huge amount of anterior pelvic tilt like this and arching my back. I'm gonna keep it as high as I can while maintaining a posterior pelvic tilt, and immediately I can feel my glute kicking on. For all you fascia boys, you want to feel your glutes, you just got to do this exercise. And just like the last exercise we did, 30 seconds, I'm going to drive that foot down into the bench, maintaining this posterior pelvic tilt, feeling a ton of glute. 30 seconds here. You should be feeling some abs as well. Now, 5 by 5 second lift-offs. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt the whole time. So for those of you that are looking to improve your shot power, your sprint speed, specifically through mobility training, this is going to be the exercise. I mean, this combination is going to be the exercise combo for you. So again, because it's PNF, our ability to drive the foot down into the bench is going to improve a contraction from the actual glute through extension. And then you're actually going to get a little bit of quad and hip flexor through the flexion. So because this is PNF, what we're doing is we're driving a contraction through the hip flexor and the quad, but we're doing it in such a lengthened position into hip extension that you are going to feel more of the hip extensor muscles as you do this exercise versus the hip flexors. But that doesn't mean that those muscles aren't contracting. It just means that they're at length. They're at basically max length. So you're not going to feel like a ton of quad or a ton of hip flexor as you do this particular exercise. We could do the same type of exercise in more of a hip flexed position, but for today, this is the variation that we're going with. And here's the thing, guys. When you're doing your mobility work, if you're doing it and it feels a little bit too relaxing, you know, it's not to say that some exercises don't feel relaxing, because there is real benefits to passive mobility training. But if you aren't doing any stuff like this, that, you know, your heart rate's going to get up. If you're doing a real max contraction for 30 seconds, then you're probably missing out on some actual mobility progress, because that's really it at the end of the day. It's all just, that's how humans have adapted since the very start of time. You know, the more stressful a situation, the more we're going to adapt to it. So passive stretching, it'll do something, won't do a ton on its own. If you combine your passive stretching with some active stuff like this, some end range isometrics, some PNF, some end range liftoffs, you're going to be in a much better spot. Let's go question number 2. Whew. Second question here. Liking these little breaks we get. Okay, so we got a 2-for-1 question here. So number 1 is going to be, how would I structure, like, in terms of a full body workout, how would I structure sets and rep progressions over an 8-week period? And I really like this question because it's taking that sets and reps question that I get in all my short form videos and making it something actually productive. So I really appreciate this question. So it's going to depend what you're going for. So there are things called intensification phases, there are things called accumulation phases, and there's a thing called a realization phase. So intensification is where you increase the intensity of the workouts. Now, intensity doesn't mean how difficult it is. It means the actual percent of your 1 rep max that is lifted, or the percent of your top speed that you do, anything like that. So higher intensity stuff is heavier stuff, it is faster stuff. So if I was in an intensification phase in the gym, what I would be doing is I'd be starting with, let's say, something like 4 sets of 10, and then I would slowly be ramping the reps down and adjusting the sets and reps back and forth as we go. But I would be taking something along the lines of 4 sets of 10, and then by the end of the intensification phase, maybe I would be doing something like 4 or 5 sets of 2 to 3. Then we have an accumulation phase where I'd maybe be taking something like a 3x8, and eventually over the weeks progressing you to something like a 4x12, a 4x15, something along those lines. And the real difference is pretty obvious, where you are taking someone and you are trying to increase the amount of max force or max speed that they can produce with something like an intensification phase. And with an accumulation phase, you're trying to build their capacity, you're trying to build their engine and their ability to repeat sub-max efforts. So it matters what the goal is of the individual athlete, it matters what the goal is of the individual exercise. And I'll have an entire week-long program for one of my one-on-one athletes and have like one day be an accumulation style day, and then have like maybe one exercise in there, a intensification exercise, like maybe their main compound, or I'll have an entire day of accumulation and like an entire day of intensification within the same week. It really depends on the athlete's situation, what they are going for, and a bunch of different factors. You can also just have an entire week of accumulation or an entire week of intensification. It really just depends on your goals. And I almost forgot, the realization is basically like you're peaking. So if you have like an important match or an important trial, that's where you would just take someone and you would really lower their volume a ton, but keeping the intensity high. But you may do like 2 sets of 2 of like 90 to 95% of your 1 rep max on a trap bar. Or you may do like 2 sprints, one of them being a 40-yard sprint, one of them being a 70-yard sprint, just to hit some top speed like a few days before your trial. Just so you make sure you maintain those physiological adaptations that you've worked so hard for, but not enough to actually like fatigue you. I hope that makes sense. And real quick, the second part of that question, are you still working with Chicago House? And if so, how is that going? I'm gonna get into the next exercise first, and then in between sets, I'll kind of explain that. So for my guy with the adductor question, we're gonna knock this one out right here for you. Okay, so with this exercise, we're going to be in quadruped, which again is hands and knees, or elbows and knees. In this case, we're gonna do it on the hands. And then what I'm going to do for this exercise is I'm gonna prop one foot up onto this box. Then I'm going to drive my foot down into the box as hard as I can for 30 seconds. Then I'm gonna do the 5-second lift-offs, 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, 5 sets. If you do this one right, this should really, really light up your glutes. So let me show you what we're looking for. I'm right here, foot is on this box like this. I'm pretty much at my end range of hip abduction right now. Now, what I'm gonna do is drive this foot into the box as hard as I can for 30 seconds. Okay. And now that I'm done with that, I'm gonna just put my foot up onto the ground. Because that was basically my end range, I'm not gonna be able to lift off at all from that position. So now that we've overloaded that lengthened position, foot's on the ground, same exercise, except I'm lifting off for 5-second holds. Here we go. God. Like I was talking about with the external rotation based exercises before the internal rotation based ones, this one I'm in hip abduction, an external rotation based exercise. I'm driving my foot down into adduction, an internal rotation based exercise. But then what really matters is the exercise after, where I'm lifting off again into abduction, starting with external rotation based hip exercises, and then we'll go into the internal rotation based ones. So am I still working with Chicago House? The quick answer is not at the moment. I worked for them for a bit at the start of, I honestly don't even remember when. My timeline is so off. But they, you know, I know the coach there. We have a good relationship, like really good guy. He's helped me out a ton, which I really appreciate. At the same time, they practiced like 45 minutes away from where I lived at the time. And then I was having some issues where I thought maybe I was going to live somewhere else. So I, at the time, was like, that was going to increase. That was almost going to double my commute time there and turn to an 1.5-hour thing each way. And at that point, it was just one of those things that I'm like, well, the business, what I'm doing here is my #1 priority. And if that's starting to take away from that, as cool of a situation as that was, it wasn't the right time for it, you know? So it's not to say I'll never train house again. That's not to say I'll never train another team again, but it didn't work out with where I was. It took up too much of my time in the first place, honestly. But I was like, it was such a cool opportunity that I was like, I'll make it work. But then as I got farther away from where they practiced, it was like, this is becoming impossible, you know? So, and I guess not a lot of you probably know about Chicago House actually. So Chicago House is a semi-pro team, obviously based in Chicago, but they don't train in Chicago. I live like in the city. I live in like the heart of the city, like right by, like, it doesn't get more central Chicago from where I live. So it's kind of hard sometimes to get in and out. But that's the price you pay for living in the best city in America. You can quote me on that. It's not New York. It's sure as hell not LA. I went on a trip to LA right as things with COVID were easing up. It's like, what, 3 years ago or something like that? That city, bro, the city, not like Hollywood, but like the city of LA is gross. And Chicago's not the cleanest, I don't think. I mean, it's cleaner than New York, and it's cleaner than LA, but fucking hell, LA was crazy. Okay, fucking hell. Getting into the liftoffs here. 5 by 5 by 5. I'm gonna answer this next question while doing this exercise. So, in theme with everything that we're doing, now I wanna do this in a little bit of a different position. I'm going to do this in a half kneeling position. I'm gonna drive internal rotation so that we can then get some actual external rotation with this exercise. So here's what we're looking to do. I wanna internally rotate this hip that's at the bottom. So I'm gonna slide this over. I want to do this against something that is pretty much immovable. So a really heavy dumbbell, heavy kettlebell. If you have a pole that you can actually use, that's gonna be best. This bench is super solid though. So this is internal rotation, driving the knee in towards me. Then I'm gonna get into this half kneeling position. In a perfect world, you have some sticks or you have some PVC pipes that you can use to help balance you in this position. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive more internal rotation as I do this exercise. I'm driving this foot in to the bench, holding, staying tall, 30 seconds. To drive even more internal rotation, you can try and square your hips up even more that way. So now that you've drove that hip internal rotation on that side, what we're gonna do is we're gonna drive external rotation on that same side, which for us is going to come in an abducted side lying position. I'm gonna be here. This foam roller is not as comfortable as I thought it would be. I'm gonna look for a straight line from shoulder to hip to knee to foot, and I'm gonna raise this leg up as high as I can, holding, then turning that foot out without letting the hips open up, and just holding this position for 5 seconds. Then lowering it back down, try to get more range of motion every time. As high as we can, turn the toe out. So the final question we're going to do is going to be this one. It says, what to do when players get 1 week off because of injury or illness in terms of conditioning. Does he need to go again with conditioning or just do training with the team? I would say if you're in season and you have just come off 1 week, you don't need to do extra conditioning really. You will notice a difference. You won't be as fit as when you first had the injury. But at the same time, 1 week, that's going to come back pretty quickly. I'd say like 2 training sessions, you probably won't really notice a difference. Now, if you have an injury that actually is irritated through football, then maybe you do need to take some time to actually rehab the injury and make sure that you are back at full strength. Maybe you need to do some proper sprint progressions to make sure that you are back 100% before you do get back to training, but that's really going to be very dependent on the injury. This exercise is going to eccentrically load extension of the spine, and then we're going to work on flexing it as we get into position. Setup of this isn't too difficult. You need something immovable. For me, I've only done this with 70s and now this will be 65s. Pretty confident it'll be fine. But make sure you have some heavy dumbbells that you're using here. Don't just use 30s because you'll probably just fall back with it. So what we're looking to do is, look, I'm risking the shoes for you guys too. So I'm going to just fully lean back, extending my spine and trying to create as big of an arch here as possible. I'm gonna hang at the bottom for like a second or two, then I'm gonna come back to the top. All right, so here we go. First variation, hands across the chest. Get the chin up nice and high, get a big arch there. Second variation, arms overhead. Third variation incoming. Grab a plate. This one's 100 pounds. Ignore the fact it says 15 pounds on it. Definitely 100. Here we go, leaning back. Final variation, I can't even do it with 15 pounds. We got this embarrassing 10-pound plate here that we're gonna hold overhead as we go down. Oh God, it's so much harder than it looks. Oh God. So you can progress yourself through those exercises. Probably want to do anywhere between like 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 10 to start. Then once you can work your way up to 3 to 4 sets of 15, go on to the next variation, make it a little bit more difficult, and you have a good ab exercise for a pretty long time. I feel like I've just been strictly business today, you know? Not a lot of yapping done by me. Sorry if you guys missed the yapping, but so serious this morning. Not sure why. Anyway, we're gonna get into a lateral flexion exercise. So the first one we did was rotation. Next one we did was extension. I'm not gonna show you the flexion exercise because I've already done it multiple times on camera now, and I've just been really liking that one. So we did that one. Now we're gonna get into the lateral flexion exercise. So similar to that earlier hip mobility exercise we did, notice how we're relating things back. Let me get into end range hip abduction here. Jesus Christ. Yep, that's already a huge stretch. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna laterally flex this way. I'm gonna light up my hips. Okay, yep, and my obliques. Big breath. This is why I say good strength training is mobility training. You can also just do this as isometric. You could do this as a speed exercise. If you wanted, you could do lateral drop catches here. Possibilities are endless. For those of you that are wondering what a lateral drop catch would be, it would be where you have the dumbbell right here, and all I would do is really quickly drop and catch, drop and catch, drop and catch. You don't even need to really drop it, but the dropping adds just a little bit of extra impulse to the eccentric. What you could do is you could just hold on to it and drop as deeply as you can. Drop as quickly as you can. Bro, every time I do automated captions, they never spell my last name correctly. I was going there, I have to change it every time. Do I enunciate things poorly? Is that what's happening? No, it couldn't be my fault. I'm gonna blame CapCut. All right, guys. Well, I thank you again for taking this time to work out with me. I appreciate it. Hopefully, you guys got some new exercises that you can use on your own. Yeah, like I said, like last week, you have any questions, I'll answer them directly to you. Just drop them in the comments below, and we'll be sure to make this a little bit more interactive. As always as well, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps me a ton. And again, as long as these videos keep getting relatively well reviews, comments, likes, views, then I'm gonna keep them coming. So just make sure to let me know if you guys are liking this. Anyways, thank you again. I will see you guys next time.